Good evening. Can I say at the outset that this group does not get any extra marks? No marks, no extra credit, but we expect them to work harder than everybody else. Is that only reasonable? Okay. Tonight carries on much in the same vein as the first week in some respects. If you remember, we spent the whole of the first evening explaining how the module works. Because until you get your head around the way the thing works, it's actually difficult to engage with it. We'll do a bit more. I'm very open to doing any more of that tonight. I know Andrew's got at least one question about the book review. So anything that's still outstanding that you want to ask about in the first half of this evening, that's the time to ask about that. And in the second half of the evening, when we had a little break, I'll say a little bit more in the first half, but you're going to be working on your tables, just doing some gentle preparatory work for the worship design stuff that you've got to do at summer school as well. I'll explain more about that as well. So tonight's very simple, really. It's stuff on what I call group process. It's mopping up any other questions about how this module works and how the assignment works, then a break, and then we'll do some stuff on the opportunity to spend some time in your groups working on or just exploring and thinking about how you might go about this worship task and how that relates to the timetable as well. Okay? So, mopping up questions how the module works, group process, and then worship design. My voice is already going, which is great. Any questions so far? That's just a simple outline for the evening. I'll ask these two to introduce themselves, so I wouldn't dare introduce them because I might get myself into deep trouble. Go on.
I know lots of you,
Yeah.
Nick.
Yes.
I'm Becky Angier, so I teach this module and the Doctrine and Church History module. So if you've had doctrinal issues, probably with me. What else do you want me to say?
So it's up to you. I'm happy.
I like the summer school module. This is our fifth, sixth year. I can't
Yeah.
remember how many years. And if anybody's told you it's rubbish, don't listen, because it's a really, really good week. It's a testing week and a challenging week, but actually it's really good. And lots of good things come out of it. Lots of smiles at the end.
Hello, my name's Karen Brady. I did this module in, I think it was in about 2014, when I was shortly after I'd been licensed as a reader. So I did it as an extension of my reader training, then went on for ordination training after that, and I'm currently a curate in Macclesfield. So when I did it, I didn't know the rest of the others in the group because we were all going for ordination training, and I was just being licensed as a reader. But like Bev said, it's a really stimulating week. You're totally immersed in that bubble of this study and theological reflection, and it really does help with that formation. And it is fun. It is hard work, but it is fun.
Okay. And one of the things we're doing tonight, which we'll get into in a minute, is basically thinking about group process. So one of the things we try, I mean, we hope, and I think we do try and do this in all our modules, but particularly in this module, as a staff team, we try to be as open as possible about everything that we're doing and the way we're doing it and the why we're doing it. So as far as we're concerned, no questions are off the table. They might not get answered, but no questions are off the table, as it were, because everything affects the process of learning. Come in. You need to have two of these. Yeah, have one. No, it's fine, it's absolutely fine. There you go. Oh, thank you. I'll keep one. I thought you might have been waiting for one more person. So. We've been expecting you. And the exciting thing is nothing exciting has happened yet, but if it had, it would be on the video. So don't panic. So we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about what I call group process and the difference between process and content. But one of the things that's absolutely clear when you think about it, and yet a lot of teachers and adult educators appear to ignore it, which is the process that's going on in a room always affects the way in which people learn. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter whether you're 2 years old in a kind of pre-nursery thing, or whether you're 85 years old the stuff that's going on in the room and the stuff that's going on in you, so you've all been reading the You and Kelly book, getting ready for your book review, the stuff that's going on in you directly affects the process in the room and directly affects your ability to respond to anything and to act any one way. So, for example, one of the things that's going to change after tonight is you now know which groups you're in. So until tonight you didn't know which groups you're in. So in some of you, stronger anxieties will be rising. I can't believe anyone. And some of you go, oh, thank God Gary put me in this group. This is so exciting. And some of you might be thinking, who are the people with the empty chairs and why are they not in this group as well? There are a couple of people who can't come tonight because of work commitments. I'm not expecting the 2 people from the Isle of Man for obvious reasons, but that's one of the reasons we video the sessions. I'm not expecting the 2 people from Derby either. Okay, it's a long way. So when I look at my lists, when I put you into groups, I know, and you might want to just check this out as you look around your group now. I know that every single group represents 3 different dioceses. For example, so look around your group, include the people missing there. Every single group represents 3 dioceses. There are more than 3 dioceses, but there are 3 dioceses in each group. Okay. This year, because of the way the numbers fell out, because there are a number of dioceses with small numbers in, I decided it to be fair to everyone, because again, to be open, there's a massive Liverpool-sized group, isn't there? Stick your hand up if you're from Liverpool. Right, okay, so you should find there's 3 people from Liverpool in every group, because I've spread the Liverpool around. That's what you do with manure, isn't it? No, even the groups are people very naturally.
But it's good stuff.
And then what I've done, take for example the Isle of Man or from Derby, I'm thinking to myself, well, if every single Liverpool group person is in a group with a Liverpool person. So I decided this year, often where we spread people out completely, I've made sure that you're not in a group without at least one other person from your diocese. Yeah. So again, you look around the group, see who's there. You should find there's at least one other person from your diocese. So which is why I put Steve and Jonathan together, not because they need to protect each other because from the Isle of Man, but basically because it's the same thing. So they're in the same group, and the 2 people from Derby in the same group. Okay. So there's three different dioceses. Liverpool over 4 groups because there are a lot of Liverpool students this year, which is really exciting. And then the last thing is you should find that there's a reasonable balance of men and women in your group, which I'm sure you would expect. Okay? And it's interesting, whenever you do this exercise, you start tweaking it around, you think there'll be lots of permutations to work with these 3 rules, and all of a sudden you find there are permutations, but actually not that many. Especially if you want to end up with 3 groups of 8 and 1 group of 7. So each group should have 8 students in, and one group's got 7 students in. The one thing you don't know yet, and that's because we don't quite know, because there's still some things going on in the background. You still don't quite know yet which staff members are looking after your group, because basically we haven't got that far. If we had, we'd have told you, but we haven't got that far. It's all to do with availability. One of the great things about this module is it's very staff hungry. Because ideally, with 4 groups, I'm looking for 8 tutors. Well, we're not going to get 8 tutors, but we hope we're going to get pretty close. So at the moment, there's the 3 of us here, and there's at least another 3 people. Okay, some of whom you may know, some of whom you may not. But as soon as that is absolutely clear who they are, then I'll just simply say, by the way, Group C is being looked after, whatever. Group D is being looked after, whatever. Does that make sense? And again, what we do there is we try and. Because one of the great things for the tutor team is that we do work together. We're not working on our own. We spend a lot of time at summer school. This is partly to warn you, really. We spend a lot of time at summer school, partly with each other, not trying to be exclusive, but basically we're trying to work out all the time what's going on in our groups, and we're trying to make our groups the best learning places possible. And so we spend a lot of time reflecting with each other. And because of the way in an academic institution you have to do some form of moderation. I think I mentioned this 4 weeks ago, didn't I? That the classic way of moderating essays will be to get 1 person to mark them and 1 person to sample them and make sure the kind of marking's okay. And we've got the same issue here also. It's about teaching going on in different centres. Well, we've got assessments going on in 4 different groups here. So one day of the week, what we usually do is move one of the tutors around in each group so that we get as much overlapping as possible. And that's actually not for your benefit, it's for our benefit. It's to make sure that what I'm saying I think is happening in my group, somebody from their or Kieran's group says, well, I think that's happening in our group as well. We think, where our group is at the moment, we think it's about here in terms of how they're fulfilling the task and getting on with the things they're doing. Yeah? So at this point, if you have any questions about which, why am I in this group, why so-and-so in this group, and I very carefully, because I always do this, I have put on the top draft, because just occasionally between now and summer school we move somebody around. Usually because I'm not aware of some connection between people. It's usually kind of an appreciative thing, not a negative thing. You usually realise actually, well, what you don't know, Gary, is that Mary and I, we actually happen to come from different dioceses, but our parishes are only 2 miles from each other, and we're actually related to each other, and we see each other all the time, and therefore actually, in terms of the best learning, it's not the best idea to have you in the same group. It's like putting brothers and sisters or 2 sisters together. So sometimes there might be reasons why we might change, but we'd only do that if we think it's going to improve the learning. Okay? And therefore, if at any point when you go home you have any concerns about what group you're in, then you just get in touch with me in confidence, and we decide whether it's something that is worth thinking about. Because what we're trying to do as staff and as ordinands is make sure we don't create any process in these groups that we don't need in the first place. Because for those of you who have done group work before is a bit like operating in a greenhouse. If you spend a disproportionate time with a small number of people over consecutive days, then some of the things that in another situation would take 6 months to develop, sometimes develop very quickly. So what you don't do, what you never do, because this would be absolutely appalling bad practice, is try and engineer a group to be lively. You see what I mean? Apart from it being manipulative, it is just completely immoral. So what therefore we try to do when we look at each other, because all the tutors are different. We look at you're from different dioceses, different backgrounds, different relationships, different networks. We try and put you into 4 groups in such a way, from the word go, we're minimalising the bottom amount of process, because process is going to happen anyway, just because we're human beings. So anything we can do to do that, we do that from the outset. Okay? This is, for those of us who, like Deb and I, have done this 5 or 6 times now, this year is new. We've never had 4 groups before. Yeah? We've usually only had 3 groups. And the reason for that is, again, this goes back to kind of small group process theory in adult education. We feel, and if you look at the timetable and look at the fact we're going to do 5 TRs and we're going to do them in pairs, you can't have more than 10 people in a group. And even if you have 10 people in a group, that is really hard work, because there's no what I call wiggle space, and that everybody's doing something all the time. So in actual fact this year, if you look at the piece of paper, there are actually 31 students. So in actual fact, it became clear that even if we wanted to do 3 groups, we can't now, because we've got too many. So you are actually in 4 groups, which is one of the reasons why we still don't know who all the staff members are, because there are more of you, hallelujah, than we thought there would be when we planned this course, when the tutor team got together. So that's what we do. So questions are not out of order. I'm not guarantee I'll answer them, but I can see your question forming on top of your head.
Can you?
Yeah. No? No? Okay.
No, just a general sense of,
Yeah.
I wish I'd made it to the first one, so that I'd a bit more idea of what was.
Did you watch the video?
I watched the video. The video was good, but
Yeah.
I couldn't hear I could hear you quite clearly, but I couldn't hear what anybody
Of
else
course.
was saying.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments at this point? Because what we're trying to do is be really clear to you about what it is we're doing. Yeah? If you remember at the last session, and if you weren't here or you've lost it, what I call the assessment forms for the practical skills exercises, the methodological reflection and small group process, you know what those forms look like. Yeah? And there's a kind of 2-way street there, because for a couple of days in the week you can be thinking to yourself, am I showing any of these things? Yeah? Because basically we're taking, we hope, what I call a completely appreciative approach to this as members of staff. We just want to do well. Yeah? So every opportunity you've got to do well, we're going to encourage you. Okay? So when we're at summer school, if you have any questions while we're at summer school, please, feel able to ask either the staff members in your group, or me as a module leader, or another member of staff, because there's loads of us. Find somebody to talk to if there's something you're mulling over. motorways, area. So, any other questions? This is all about you knowing how we've set this up, because we're not trying to have any kind of surprises or secrets. It's not that kind of game. It's about what we're doing together. Anything you want to say about that? No? I'm obviously chipping on it. So, are we okay to move? On? Okay. On the back of your piece of paper, which is for the second half of the evening, you can clearly see, as I said last time, that for the worship design groups, they are the same design groups as you're reading out. Okay. And I'll talk a bit about that just before we go to the coffee break. I have this funny feeling there's something I've forgotten to say, but it'll come to me in a minute. Okay. So, yeah, okay. Let me just turn the PowerPoint on. Everything in University chess takes time to warm up. So I'm willing to bet that some of you in the room, because of the work you do in your own professions, either currently or in the past, know something about group process. Would that be reasonable? How many of you think you've done any reading, teaching, thinking about group process in the past? I am. Yeah, that's not bad, is it? Okay. So if we're thinking about group process, what do you infer from this picture then? What am I going to say next? If you were doing this, what are you going to Stuff going on under the water. Excellent, yeah. I can never remember the figure, but what's the proportion?
90%.
Sorry? I knew you'd know. 90%. Okay, so. Yeah? So that piece of paper you've got, which says about small group process, what you're doing, all the things that are on that piece of paper are linked to your ability to either see, intuit, or discern that. Yeah? I.e. to actually be able to discern what is actually going on underneath in the group that's in your room. So if the classic one is, someone's not speaking. Are they not speaking because they're tired? Are they not speaking because they're a kind of introvert? Are they not speaking because somebody's offended them? Are they not speaking because they're lost? Are they not speaking because, basically their mind is actually somewhere else? Yeah? And so the first thing to work out is, why is the person speaking? And the most important thing is to remember to yourself, well, just because the person's speaking, this might not be a negative thing. I mean, there may be a really, really good reason why this person should not speak. But you've got to, the only way you can work it out, especially if you're not going to start asking them questions, which is quite tricky, isn't it, is to use the other skills that come with you. Some people are what I call natural intuitors of group process, in the sense that they feel things inside, and so if they're in a room and something's going on, then they'll either start to feel very excited because something exciting is happening, or they will actually start to feel uncomfortable. And they might not even know why they feel uncomfortable, but they know it, they intuit that something is happening in the room. Now, people like me, I know for myself that when I was 18, I had no idea what was happening in any room I was in. Yeah? And one of my friends used to describe my life and my brain as being a series of pigeonholes. And in any one of the pigeonholes, he was very good, but he had no idea at all how to connect the pigeonholes. And yet something happened in my life, in my late 18s and early 20s at university, whereby for the first time, I began to make a connection between the things I was thinking in my head and the things that I was actually feeling in my inside. Yeah? And the interesting thing is, an awful lot of people, particularly when you're in an institution which is about learning, an awful lot of people operate in their head. Now, it goes without saying, if you're doing the doctrine module and you're doing something on Christology, there is a bit of your head at some point has to get your head around what all these people have written and what it means. But the danger is, if you're not careful, is that because you're being trained in that, you spend the rest of the week doing that. So the classic one is, you're doing something really clever about Christology. You go home, and the children, or the dog, or your granny come to you, and basically you are completely disinterested, because all you want to know is how the incarnation works. Yeah? So, and the person doesn't speak, but to any other observer, this person is in distress. But you go, do you know anything about Gnosticism? I mean, because you're operating totally in your head. Yeah. Now, and it's probably an exaggeration to say, because it's like a big generalisation that's not true. That if you're on some kind of vague spectrum, from a feminine side to a kind of male side, it's reasonable to say, I can say this as a man, that when you take the big generalisation, on the whole, men are worse at it. Yeah? But that doesn't mean there aren't women who are rubbish at it, and it doesn't mean there are actually men who are fantastic at it. But a lot of people who have my kind of background, and particularly I suspect if you have the kind of background like I do, where, for example, you're brought up in the sciences, then you are, as a teenager, you are compelled to operate in a completely different way. For example, I remember from all my friends in sixth form who were reading James Joyce, that kind of stuff, because they're doing something different. So they're reading stuff which is actually going to interact with their emotions. But some of us are not brought up that way, and therefore it comes as a bit of surprise to realise that in a room there may be something else going on other than just the words that are coming out of somebody's mouth. Okay? Anybody got any questions about that, or anybody who's done any of this stuff before would like to make a comment that might help us illustrate that or understand that? Anybody? We okay with that? Let me do a little bit. I'm going to do one more slide with a very tiny piece of theory. Let me give you two more pieces of theory. If you go onto Amazon or go to your library or use Google Scholar and look for books on small group process, the world is almost your oyster. I mean, there's lots and lots of stuff being written. If you look on the bibliography for this module, you will find at least one book, not one of the key texts, but one of the books that says something about small group process. To my mind, the two most famous theories is the one by Schutz and the one by Bion. Okay, so anybody do the Bion one in like 3 words? Yeah, the whole Bion one, it operates around the whole business about fight or flight. Yeah, so the whole Bion one is actually, and my reaction is here: is it going to be to run away, or is it going to do to fight, or is it going to be to engage? It's a very, very simple theory. Another very simple theory, which I like, is the one by a guy called Schutz, a bit like the Peanuts one, but not Peanuts. And Schutz uses an illustration very simply of saying what happens when you get into a rowing boat or when you get into any size boat. The first thing is that you're stood on the quay side. So at that point, you're actually not in the boat. Yeah? But when you get in the boat, even if you don't do this consciously, what you begin to start to do is to look around and say, well, who else is here? Yeah? Then you might decide to say, as you're still sat in this boat next to the jetty, I wonder where we're going. Then you might decide to say, I wonder who's in charge. And then you might say to yourself, okay, so-and-so's who's in charge, but who's got the tiller and who's got the oars? Or if it's a really fancy rowing boat, who's got control of the outboard motor? Who put the petrol in? They all become questions about the process that's around at that time when you're sat in the boat. And you haven't even left the quayside yet. You can imagine what happens when you've been left the quayside for a few days and somebody is unhappy about where the person who's perceived to be in charge is taking the boat. A certain kind of process happens, which then becomes either, to go back to the Beyond thing, a kind of fight or flight, or there has to be some engagement about what's going on here. So in every single group that you are in, whether we like it or not, there is always some group process going on. And even in a very, very hierarchical setup, where you've gone to a committee meeting and there's minutes and agendas and there's a chair, there will still be questions and issues about authority and power all the time, even when it's very clearly laid down. Because even in that structure, people will challenge authority. Or people will simply kowtow to authority. or simply people will ignore authority. And in my experience in the church, the words associated and the conversations associated with power and authority tend to be dirty words that nobody really often wants to talk about. In another situation, I would say it's also true with money in many of our churches. But one of the things we often don't want to talk about is actually issues about power and authority. Yeah. So, as a straw poll, how many of you at some point in your ministry or life come across a church warden who says, I've been trying to give up for years but nobody will do it? Okay. And then the hands up if you have a sneaky suspicion at some point that they're really actually only doing that to hang on to power. So you see my point. And the thing is then, which is why now we're in a pastoral care module, you can't just go and beat the church warden, can you? Well, careful the video. So you can't just go and beat the church warden up. In another organisation, there might be a different approach to that. There would simply at the next meeting be a vote. I vote we should have so and so. But the church is in a different place because in this module we are dealing at the same time with issues of pastoral care, which the church all wants to put it at its forefront. You're dealing with the stuff that's going on inside you, which is what the Ewan Kelly book's about. And at the same time, we're dealing with process. And at Summer School, when we're in our small groups, we're primarily thinking about small group process. But one of the things that happens, one of the things that happens, is that from time to time, you wonder what's going on in another group. And sometimes you talk about things over tea and coffee or lunch, and one of the things your group will talk about early on are the kind of things that you're allowed to talk about outside your group and the things that you don't talk about outside your group. And as soon as you do that, we've now entered the field of intergroup process. Okay? And intergroup process is rife in all our parishes. It's a relationship between all the different stakeholders. So the person who's in the choir or the worship band, the person who does the flowers, the person who does the grounds, the person who does the children's work, the person who's on the PTC, the person on the standing committee, they're all different groups, all of which have their process like this, and then they have an intergroup process. Okay? So you've got small group process, then you've got intergroup process. You've then got what you call medium group process, which is quite hard to identify, but are the kind of things that happens in a group of about 15 to 20 people. And it's neither a small group, nor what I'm coming to next, a large group, and operating in what I call medium-sized groups is really, really difficult, because it's neither one nor the other. So you've got small group process, you've got intergroup process, you've got what I call medium-sized group process, and then you've got large group process. A large group process is anything where there's more than 50 or 60 people in the room. Yeah. And in most of our institutions that we are members of, we tend to survive in large group process by having rules and regulations and standing orders. One of the places where you can experience large group process, which still has some rules because of safety issues, is if you go to a large sporting event or a football match or a big concert where there aren't chairs. Because all of a sudden you experience what it's like when 500 people decide to move, or 500 people decide to sit down, or 10,000 people don't like the 10,000 people on the other side of the space. So that becomes kind of large group process. We're not going to do that at Summer School. We're not even going to do medium group process at Summer School, except that's what happens every time we gather for worship. Because it's going to be the gathering for worship. We're on. Are we a medium group, or are we a small, large group? When there's 50 of us or 55 of us in the chapel, yeah. But we are in our things concentrating on small group process, and inevitably there will be implications about what I call the small group process, the relationship between the small groups. Okay. Yeah.
Gary, can I just clarify? So, like in a group process,
Yeah.
you've got three things, haven't you? You've got what the group's actually doing, so
Yeah.
say worship divine.
Yeah.
You've got what's being said and done that everybody can see, and then you've got the layer of the sort of intuitive, social and emotional intelligence thing that you need to read. Is all that what you would call small group process, or is it only?
No, so I would. The thing about the iceberg for me is about making a distinction in words between what I call content and process. So the content is when someone says, I think we should close the door.
Yeah.
And the process is when somebody says, no, I don't want the door closed. Are they saying they don't want the door closed because it's drafty, or because they don't like it because you said, let's close the door? See what I mean? But for the person who's got no awareness, they go slightly puzzled, well, it's just cold, just want the door closing. And you go, no, it's because last week I had a big fight, or whatever it might be. Yeah? Laid on top of that, which is what I thought we were going to say, the other three things is that every group has got a task. Yeah? But layered over the task of the group are the needs of the individual. And an individual has both needs, and other people might say an individual have an agenda as well. But the hardest bit to get at, for many people when you're new to this, is actually what the group is doing. And until we begin to get the hang of it, sometimes we don't even realise what the group is doing. Because we only focus on what the task is. Gary's told us to do this. Or me, how I'm feeling. But if you were to, my favourite illustration of, the Martian appears and sits outside, the Martian would not look at the individuals or even the task and say, what that group is doing, or that group's running away, that group's fighting, that group's forming, norming, and storming is the other theory. So what stage in the life of the group is that group at the moment, which has sometimes got nothing to do with the task or the individual. But most of us, because of the way we're brought up, we only tend to think of the task, and some of us are very, very task orientated, particularly if you're a person who's got the kind of profile where you're a finisher, then it becomes really important. And then some of us are really good at actually working out where we are. But even then, there's still the question, well, what's the group doing? You know what I mean?
So, I'm thinking from my background
Yeah.
and where I am here. So, team dynamics, are we talking about team dynamics? Is it something slightly different? Because you talk about a finisher, a completed finisher, in a group, in that respect. So, those dynamics that you've got, that you've got from the individual people, or is this something slightly different? Is this a different level?
The trouble is, it always depends, the person you're talking to, or the book you're reading, what they have defined team dynamics as. It's just as me. And I think, this is my position statement on it, I think some people talk about team dynamics because they actually haven't got this language. So they talk about personality clashes, or they talk about having different gifts, and they talk about teams, and all that stuff is relevant and important, but in all those things there's content and process going on all the time. And in a small group has a life, because a small group has a beginning and it has an end. And there are classic ways of describing the way in which a group gets together, like Schultz does, or like Bion does, or the forming, norming, storming, which shows you what the life of a group is. Yeah. And one of the things that we live with ministering in the church is we constantly move in and out of small groups all the time. Yeah. And for some of you, summer school might be a bit unusual about being in the same group for 5 days. Yeah, that should be regarded as a gift, not a challenge. Because often we move into a group and it's there, and then but every time somebody comes and goes, the dynamics of the group, I've used the word now, the process in the group will change because of the person who's come in, or the person who has left, or the person we're longing for to arrive or to leave.
I think the fact that we're together for an entire week in these small groups, and the nature of what we're talking about, theological reflecting on our own emotion and this, that and the other, it's going to be quite painful for some people, having formed your group.
Yeah.
But there's certain for every team that I've ever been in and helped to set up, the conflict will appear. We will irritate one another. And you're going to have your provocateurs, and you're going to have your people who, like yourself, who just like to pull the pin on a grenade and throw it in. Will
So I'm moving now.
well, they used to now. It is going to be painful.
Well, in a work situation like yours, one of my mantras when I'm in any very highly task-oriented situation, apart from an emergency where something has to happen in the next 30 seconds, in any really important task group I've got, one of my mantras is unresolved process blocks the task. So if you've got a task and the group is focused on the task, the group will do that task efficiently, quickly and creatively. But if something's going on because someone's rubbing somebody up the wrong way, or somebody fancies somebody, for example, whatever the dynamic is between different people, or because two people come from the same part of town and they're different from everybody else, that creates a process. If the group doesn't address that process, and 9 times out of 10, addressing it usually actually just means naming it. That you two talk in that language all the time because you both come from Haywood, not a business. If you don't do that, what actually happens is the process that creates actually gets in the way of you completing the task. Yeah? So one of my mantras is the unresolved process blocks task. And the other thing is if you're distinguishing between content and process isn't bad or good, it just is. So sometimes people think process is a dirty word. Process just is. Yeah. And to go back to what you were saying, because I feel I need to comment on that because it might take us down the wrong pathway. To remind ourselves, what we're doing at summer school, having read at least 2 books on pastoral care, is using the tool of theological reflection to explore what a ministry team might look like and experience when it tries to address pastoral care issues in its community. And in the process, because certainly a lot of the time we'll be using the 4-source model, though somebody else might decide to introduce another model, and I've made it clear that is permissible. One of the things the 4-source model does in particular is take your experience seriously. So we start off talking about something innocuous, like, people keep putting French coins in the collection or something. And you think this is a completely innocuous conversation, but you turn it into a theological reflection, and in terms of where it takes you, it then, without any of us knowing it, impinges upon somebody's experience that they've had somewhere. And what our work at summer school does is say, well, when that happens, name it, be honest about it. That's all. It's not good or bad, it's just what happens. Which is why, I think, this is my position statement again, so you don't have to agree with me, I think that some other models of theological reflection spend too much time in the head, and they actually ignore what's going on inside. I think if you do the 4-source model faithfully and with integrity, you can't ignore what's happening inside you. Which is why in every one of the methods that you've got, there's what I call the safeguarding question, which says each person has to say to themselves, am I happy to carry on talking about this, or do we as a group pull the plug? Because I'm not in a good place today. So to me, we're trying to explore things, we're not trying to beat ourselves up. Do you have any thoughts on that? Keep saying this to you. No, it's okay, it's okay. Or Karen?
Not
From the Misty days?
I thought the juxtaposition of team and group was quite interesting. And that said, my thought process now was team sort of implies that we're on a group, that there's a group mission, a group task. And I was trying to make a distinction between group, which you did really very well with the life of the group over the week. With the group, each of the groups do have a task, and it's something that we do together, but the learning is far, far broader than the term implies.
And one of the things we do, and it's very, very simple, and I'm telling you in case we forget, because then you can shout at us, is that on the last day, on the Friday, we spend a few minutes with each other at the end, at which we acknowledge that the group you are in will never exist ever again. You'll see each other, yeah, but the group that you are in, this table, with whoever the staff member is in that group, or staff members, when you get to Friday, after you walk out on Friday, that group will never meet again. So one of the things that happens in the life of the group, of course, you then begin to realise you're getting near the end time, and that changes the process. Because you suddenly realise, actually, we've been doing all this task. Well, after Friday, we're not going to be here anymore. You still see each other as individuals, but that's what I mean by some groups have a life, they have a beginning and an end. The problem with institutions is institutions like things to go on forever. So if you have a PCC in your parish, you never not have a PCC. So that's me. It's always there. And yet, any person, lay or ordained minister who is sensitive to the group dynamics of a PCC will make sure at the beginning of a new PCC period you spend some time thinking about the life of the group of the PCC, because this is a new PCC. And also, conversely, when you get to the end and you know that 2 or 3 people are not going to be coming back because they've decided, you know, their terms up, whatever, you take seriously the fact that the life of this group is coming to an end. But institutionally, the institution expects the PCC to go on forever. There can't never not be a PCC. Yeah. And one of the illustrations from my teenage years is that I grew up on the kind of housing estate in Manchester where the youth club was really strong. Yeah, so you're talking in the 1960s, early 1970s. The youth club was really, really strong. So me and all my friends, male and female, would go to the youth club every week, okay? And the youth club rules are very clear. When you became 14, you were allowed to join, and when you were 18, you had to leave. And it's true of Scouts, Brownies, Boys Brigade, you name it. Any organisation has rules about when you join and when you leave. And the most life-changing thing that happened in my teens is the vicar, on somebody else's advice, decided to start a youth group. And to get in the youth group, you have to be 16. And when the group had been going for about 3 years, it came to its end, and it kind of folded. But some people in the parish had real great difficulty with this youth group, because once it had been going a year, all the 15-year-olds who were 15 a year ago said they wanted to join now, because the only model they had was the institutional organisational one. And the vicar said to them, no, you can't, because we're going to start a different group for you. Because this group has a beginning and an end. It's the difference between a group and an organisation. So to me.
And one of the benefits of the assessment should, and usually does, come to an end by the Thursday evening at Sunday school. So that means that the last session that takes place on the Friday morning is a session in which you as a group can decide how to mark the end of your week outside of the assessment. And in an institution, there are not very many ways positively in which you get a chance to do that. Groups end because they run out, or people don't or you have to close them suddenly. But the opportunity to choose how your group life ends is quite special. And each year, each group decides how they're going to do that in their own particular way. Sometimes there's prayer for each other. Last year, the group that I was in produced a piece of liturgy. They wrote a psalm, which was a lovely thing. And so as you're at the beginning of the week and now, that's quite hard to imagine, that the curve of learning that happens during the week is so intense that you then sort of bump into Friday and it becomes a significant thing for most people. It can be that spiritual moment that is significant for what comes for you next. We have people that say things to each other and pray things for each other, I think in ways that would not have happened had that learning been taking place. It's quite a gentle space.
And it's because of that I and the rest of us as tutors recognise that is going on. It's why we spent so much time 4 weeks ago and tonight explaining to you how the course works, and explaining why you're in this group, and explaining why, you know, which tutors you've got, etc., etc. It's all about actually being honest about what's going on, as opposed to a very kind of, if you like, paternalistic or, you know, approach which basically says, well, you're just here to learn and we know what's good for you. And one of the ways in which this is illustrated is by the fact that in the we have 5 TR sessions, Saturday morning, Sunday afternoon, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning. It's all on the timetable. And in fact, our intense group work finishes by lunchtime on Wednesday. One of the ways in which the staff, the tutors, operate in your groups is, yes, they are there to kind of eventually assess your 2 practical skills tasks. Yes, they are ultimately there to make the whole thing safe, because that's our responsibility. So I'm not exaggerating, but if someone decides they're actually going to kill somebody, then we're not going to let it happen. You know what I mean? So what I called it in Star Trek terms, you know, the final frontier. The final frontier for Edinburgh Summer School, what happens in any one of the rooms, is the responsibility of the staff. So if anybody decided one day they thought something was inappropriate, you wouldn't get into trouble, we get into trouble. So it's our responsibility to hold that final boundary. And yet, when each one of you are in pairs leading theological reflections, when you're doing that, you're responsible for the room, apart from the final boundary. And we as members of staff participate in your theological reflection as participants. So what we don't do is set up a goldfish bowl where we put 8 of you in and say, right, Angie, you know, go off and do your TR now, and we'll stand over here and we'll watch you, and we'll get a clipboard and we'll compare notes at the end and yeah, and that's it. We don't do that. What we're doing is we're engaged in the theological reflection all the time. And so at some point somebody in my group might say, you've been talking too much, Gary, just give it a rest for a minute. And you can say that because you might be the person who's mentoring the group at that point. You might say, just hang on a minute, I want to listen to so-and-so, because at that level, we're operating as participants. And yet, of course, which you can't ignore, all going through your mind is, oh, but he's a tutor, isn't he? So you've got to deal with that process. You see what I mean? And that happens in our parishes all the time. Yeah? Because we change roles, don't we? So the ultimate kind of, it may never happen in your parish because life's a bit different now, but the situation where, on a Sunday morning, you're the person who's the curate or the reader or the person who's preaching or leading the worship or the rector or whatever, and there are several people in that congregation who, on another situation on Tuesday or Friday, are going to be your superior, or they're going to be the person responsible for you. Like, for example, you're preaching on Sunday, you're saying what the gospel is all about, and literally on Thursday, she's a surgeon and you're under her knife. Well, you have no authority as the rector or the reader or the licensed person now. Nothing comes with that, because now you're in a different place where the rules are different and the processes are different. You see what I mean? And one of the things, I say this a lot, one of the things I really like about All Saints, because we're not a college, is that all of us, some of us perhaps diminishing, will continue to meet each other in a variety of roles for many, many years. And even while you're on the course, one day you might meet me and I might be your module leader, or I might be your director of studies. But the next time you might meet me, we might both be worshipping side by side in a service that we've got to, which we're responsible for. And who we are does not matter one whit. And at the point at which any of you and all of you become licensed, then you stop becoming students and you become our ministerial colleagues. So what I mean? So when you're in All Saints, you are constantly all the time negotiating different boundaries and roles where you have different responsibilities. Yeah? Take a very extreme example. If something happens and I fall on the floor and Matt says, don't do that, I'm not going to say, don't be stupid, you're a student. You see what I mean? But some people do. There are some people, not just in the church, but in different organisations, who find it very difficult not to carry the authority that's vested in one place into a different place where they have no means to take that authority. See what I mean? And it's a complete opposite to think about a different logic of what you might call about a certain ministry. You're sitting on the high horse of your respectability and status because that's who you are. Well, this is the antithesis of that. That's when we're running these groups. Yeah, we have responsibility staff. Yeah, we're going to be doing some assessments. But when we're doing the groups, we're working together. And as part of our commitment to that, when we get to that last Friday that Beth talked about, we offer you an invitation to say something about anybody else in the group appreciatively that they would ask. People say, would you like to receive any feedback about anything? And you can ask the group to give you feedback on Friday. You can choose not to. Okay? Always, unless something dramatic has happened. I mean, something happened dramatic in my life. Always, the staff always say, will you give us feedback as well? Face to face, in the group, the other groups don't know what you need to know. Can you tell me about what this group's been like? And you talk as a peer. Because you're talking about how you're operating in that group. Not, if it's me for example, not what I'm like as a director of studies, not what I'm like as the module leader, what I was like for the last 5 mornings in this group as a person. See what I mean? And that's all to do with being able to recognise the process that's going on in the room. Okay? You're looking a bit serious. We're going to have a break in a minute. Any questions?
I've got a silly one, Gary.
Yeah.
You've laboured quite a bit on things about group processes,
Yes.
and I don't mean that in a
Yeah.
disrespectful way at all. When it comes to actually doing the group task of the
Yeah.
theological reflection,
Yeah.
how important is you get to the end of the 16th or the 20th step of whatever it is? If group process is just as important, or maybe
It isn't, it isn't. At one level, it's not important to get to the end, because the most important thing is all the time you're working with what's happening in the room now. 9 times out of 10 when people do that, they actually get to the end. Occasionally they don't. But usually, when people don't get to the end, it's usually because there's either something going on in the people leading it, or other people going on in the group, or something in the process which is actually stopping that from being finished. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It could just be like, it could just say, well, basically, I would say about my group, you know, I'd go back to talk to Bev and Karen and say, well, basically, my group went on holiday for an hour. They metaphorically started, you know, they've had an hour of red herrings. And the people who were facilitating it allowed the red herrings to go on, which is no wonder we didn't get to the end. Then, we as staff members have a dilemma, because we're participants in the group. So we don't sit there going, oh, they're going on a red herring for an hour. You have to find a way of commenting without sitting on your authority that comes from outside the group and saying, well, is this not a red herring? So, the one answer is, it doesn't matter if you don't get to the end. The second question is, the interesting question is, why didn't you get to the end? And if you know why you didn't get to the end, that's fine. It's when people don't get to the end and don't know why they didn't get to the end. And if we don't know why, then we're in a bit of a mess. But that happens sometimes. This is, you know, it's not like mathematics is 2 + 2 = 4. You have to see what's going on. So it is all about awareness, I think. Yeah.
Can I just clarify, Guy? When we do the assignments at Sunday school,
Yeah.
we're doing 7 theological reflections in the groups.
Yeah. 5, hopefully. If things work well, yeah.
Not necessarily what we bring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Might not be chosen. But are we writing that up as we did in the theological reflection that we've just done?
No.
Is it
All you do is, what you're encouraged to do later on in the day is say to yourself, is there anything I want to write in my journal?
okay?
You don't have to hand that journal in, but at the end of the day, when you get to Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon and Thursday morning, we give you time to write your summative reflection for your portfolio.
Right.
One of the things you draw upon is the journal you've been keeping since we started here 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And you choose which bits to take out of your personal journal to put in your, for want of a better word, public portfolio to illustrate what I've learned about pastoral care is. And then one of the tricks then as well, and we all have this difficulty, is because we're doing this work in such a way at Sunday School that we're using the tool of theological reflection. The portfolio isn't about theological reflection, it's actually about pastoral care. And so again, you've got to think, well, what's the tool, you know, tell me about pastoral care? You know, if I get better at this tool, will I get better at pastoral care or worse? I mean, it's all kind of,
Yeah.
and that can be a little bit tricky sometimes because we all tend to deal with what was immediate, what we did this morning. Well, what we did was, as opposed to, hang on, well, what did you learn? And therefore, that's another way of saying that if you've got 2 hours for the theological reflection, and as soon as I put a number on this, you all start beating yourselves up. If you've got 2 hours for theological reflection, if I was leading that theological reflection, in my mind I'm going to finish it in less than 90 minutes. I'm going to finish it in about 75 minutes, so that my group can have a conversation for 45 minutes about this pastoral care issue. You see what I mean? But what tends to happen, for a whole host of reasons that you're identifying, particularly because we might not really want to talk about what the issue is, even if it's just, you know, the French colleagues on the collection plate, is that we find process ways of not getting to the end before the 2 hour slot. So those of you who've done any kind of counselling, listening skills, for example, will know that if you have an hour's appointment, when does the client, the person, say all the most important things? Sorry? In the last 5 minutes. Why is that? Because they can go out the door, can't they? Well, it's not as simple as that. There are a whole host of reasons, but it's one of the things. It's a process that happens, and you say to yourself, why is it happening? Why does it keep happening? And then, when you're getting somewhere with somebody, when they come in, they start where they left off. But other people go back 45 minutes, don't they? They have to start, you know. And it's the same thing. And a process is going on in the room during that 2 hours. But the other thing not to forget is that then you have half an hour coffee break. Then you come back for an hour where the staff will take over, and together, all of us, we spend the hour basically trying to work out what we've learned about theological reflection and what we've learned about the group process. And in the first couple of TRs, we tend to spend more time on what we've learned about the tool and not a lot about what to do about group process. And the aim is by the end of the week is to tip the balance so that we're spending more time talking about pastoral care and less time talking about the tool we're using, which is also why, and I keep saying this, it doesn't matter whether you go first or last. You've got opportunities all week to show that you know how to do theological reflection and you know how group process works. You don't have to be at the front to be able to demonstrate that. Being at the front is just one of the ways in which you demonstrate that. And I know that's hard to believe because it's just true. You think, I don't believe you can, but it just is. So again, if you that hour after coffee, for me, is like a gift horse for your journal. Because what did we learn? Well, when I get back, I'm going to write it down before I forget. What we learned was. Yeah. Okay. Go on.
Just a clarity question, particularly around catch-up. I think I kind of alluded to this last time we were here. I'm still trying to work it out. Because we're big groups,
Yeah.
we all have to come with a pastoral situation.
That's right. Yeah.
We might not all get to
That's right.
deliver the one that we have brought.
Yes.
So in the summative reflection, you might be actually saying that you've learned about pastoral care from somebody else's
Absolutely.
pastoral issue.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So,
And also,
say it out loud. maybe.
also, you might still want to put your 200-word incident, for want of a better word, in your portfolio, even if the group didn't work on it. Because you could comment yourself on the suitability of the incident you chose, what you think might have happened with it, where you think it might have led to learning, or not, because it's your portfolio. So there's no compulsion to put your 200-word incident in the portfolio. What has to go in the portfolio is the book review, 2 skill tasks, and the summative reflection. But the other bit, the journal stuff and the incident thing is up to you.
Thank you.
You might have found,
Yeah.
you might have learned something during the week, pastoral care-ishly, that applies particularly to your situation, even though it wasn't used, in which case you can link to it.
It's helpful. Thank you.
I'm just looking at the time, so I actually wanted to stop 5 minutes ago, so that's my problem, not yours. You asked about book reviews, didn't you? Shall I just do that very quickly now? Just ask your question again, because that's better.
It's just because I've done various different book reviews
Yeah.
for different courses, like spiritual director and counsellors. It's just really getting a kind of view on how you like us to frame it, so that I don't go down the wrong track.
Yeah. Okay. So, what it says from memory on the guidance is that there are 2 possible ways of approaching this. One is to either way you need to read the whole book. I'll just preface that. Either way you need to read the whole book. Which, to be fair, if you're doing a book review of another organisation, you might not. It depends what the purpose of writing the book review was. So, in another place and time, you might write a book review by skimming a book. But in this case, my agenda for giving you a book review is to get you to read Kelly before you come to Sunday school, cover to cover. Even if you do skim it first and go back and do whatever. Okay. So I have a kind of agenda to get you to read the book. Having read the book, strikes me you're being offered 2 ways to review it. You either just review the whole book and you say what you think is good or bad about this book. Yeah. Or you concentrate on one of the chapters to use that to illustrate what you think about the whole book. Because that allows us to work in different ways. Now, if you think of other book reviews you've done in other places, or book reviews you might read in newspapers or journals, or even, this is my point, even the Durham guidance on book reviews, yeah, what it doesn't require is a bibliography or a list of references. This one does. Why? Because the book review is one opportunity to show you that the learning outcomes of the module, and you do that by referring to the things that you have read. So that means, which is the scary bit, I do admit, that to do a really good book review in this context, you need to, at some point in the book review, when you said it's really good, or you think it's dubious, or you think it's taking a different line to so-and-so, you need to know about so-and-so. So without giving you, MA, PH level work that's going to take you 2 years, it's a bit like doing a literature review, because you've got to review that book and also demonstrate that you know something about the field. So there are other books on the reading list, and you can use books that are not on the reading list. I'd expect, as soon as you put a number on this, you're in trouble, aren't you? I'd expect you to be touching, 3, 4 or 5 other sources other than the book review, to, in the process of writing the book review, to demonstrate the learning outcomes of the module. Does that make sense? And therefore it is quite hard work, I admit. It's not just wrapping up a book review. You've got to sit down and do some thinking, and do some reading around, because we're not teaching the pastoral care module. Yeah? And you've got the Leach book as well, which you can use. Yeah. It's very obvious, but I shouldn't say this, but it is obvious, isn't it? Not to make a link to the Leach book is a missed opportunity, because you need to read the Leach book as well. And for some of you who've got, come from different professions and disciplines, there may be stuff you've read elsewhere. The fact that none of us have heard of it doesn't matter. It's the fact that you've read something somewhere about whatever, and you bring this to say, well, I think, he or she's doing a really good job here, or I think what they're saying is a bit weak because so-and-so says. It's making the reader aware that you know something, that you know something more than just that book review. And it's not just, I liked it. Is that okay? I thought it was something else to do. I forgot what it was now. I think that was it actually. Is that okay? So if we have a little break, can we come back in 10 minutes? Is that okay? And then we're going to do a little group process exercise, which will take about 10 minutes. And then we'll spend the last half an hour doing our just a bit of thinking about our worksheet. But the quicker we can work better, the sooner we'll finish in good times.